Welcome to Forum at 360. I'm Jeremy Hsieh. Tonight, we're exploring Alaska's Filipino community. Filipinos were part of waves of foreign-born laborers coming for the salmon canning industry and mining booms in the early 20th century. By the 1920s, national policy changes shut down most immigration from non-European countries. In the 1960s, national immigration policies were relaxed, and the boom with the discovery of oil reopened Alaska to new waves of immigrants from Asia. Since the 1990s, the Philippines has been the most common country of origin among Alaska's foreign-born population, according to the Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development. As of 2013, the U.S. Census Bureau estimated Alaska's Filipino population at more than 26,000, one of the state's largest ethnic groups. Our guests tonight are three prominent Filipino-Alaskans. Loy Maturan is a retired sociology professor and college administrator who taught in the Philippines. He's also becoming an author with his wife in a self-published book about being kidnapped in 1989. That kidnapping eventually led to their immigration to the United States. Dante Reyes is a past president of Filipino Community Inc, which has a prominent community hall in historic downtown Juneau. He's an accountant by trade who found himself separated from his family and working to support them. He'll share his personal story, which has elements common to many Filipino immigrants to Alaska. And finally, Raffy Castanos is an activist who has organized and advocated for various Filipino causes in Alaska for years. He's a retired human resources manager who's been repeatedly recognized by the Alaska legislature and the Philippines government for his volunteer contributions in community building. Let's all welcome them to Forum at 360. We'll have an opportunity to take questions from the audience after each speaker has spoken. And first, we'll hear from Loy Maturan. He's going to discuss Philippines history, particularly the United States' rule and influence on the island nation. Professor Maturan?
Good evening. Thank you, Jeremy, for the commercial. Let me start my presentation with a joke. Not so long ago, a volunteer lay preacher in the Philippines like me and a taxi driver died almost at the same time. They went to heaven almost at the same time. While they were at the pearly gate, waiting for St. Peter to usher them, the lay preacher was excited about settling in a mansion as promised by Jesus when Jesus was here on earth. The Gospel of St. John says, "Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in me and my Father. I go to prepare a place for you. There are many mansions in heaven. But you believe in me, then I will come back and then take you to myself, so that where I am, there ye may be also." The lay preacher was excited about being ushered into a beautiful mansion. So when Peter arrived, they were ushered to the subdivisions in heaven. They were led to the place where the mansions were lined up, walled with crystal-like walls beside the river of life. Then Peter said to the taxi driver, "This is your quarter, a beautiful mansion." The lay preacher was expecting to live in a mansion also, more beautiful than that of the taxi driver. He walked with Peter down the river of life, and beside the river of life was a small cottage. And then Peter said, "This is your quarter, enjoy it." The lay preacher said, "What? A cottage is not a mansion. I expected a mansion." Then Peter said, "You know as a preacher that awarding of mansions and quarters in heaven are based on your works on earth." The preacher said, "Yes, I know that. I was a lay preacher. I preach in our church when our pastor is absent. And this poor taxi driver was very reckless in his driving. He's awarded a mansion, and I am awarded only a cottage." Peter said, "That's true. Do you know why? When the taxi driver works, his passengers would not sleep but pray and thank God for their safety. But when you preach, your members would sleep." End of the story. When I was in college, I took a number of history courses. Most of the history courses were boring, and I was dozing in classes. I was a math minor, and I took history of mathematics, and it was one of the most boring history classes that I had. I was bored listening and confused why 1 + 1 = 2 and 1 × 1 = 1. I could not understand that. Why 1 - 1 is 0 and 1 divided by 1 is also 0. I could not understand that. But anyway, our teacher said that that is the truth, and seek the truth, for the truth will make you free. Now this evening, I hope you will not fall asleep with this history presentation of the Philippines, so that you will not deny me my mansion in heaven. If I were to teach Philippine history at the University of Alaska today or this semester, I would divide Philippine history periods into 4. The first one would be the pre-Spanish period. The second would be the Spanish period. The third will be the American occupation period. And the fourth would be the Philippine independence up to the present. Now tonight, my task is to share with you Philippine history during the American period or the occupation of the Americans in the Philippines. The first presence of the Americans in the Philippines started during the Spanish-American War. Specifically, it started when Commodore George Dewey and his fleet fought the Spanish Armada in the Manila Bay area. The result of that naval fight was that the Spanish fleet were destroyed and Commodore Dewey won. The fight was extended to the land, and they fought the first Battle of Manila. Aided by the Filipino Revolution people, the members of the Katipunan, who have been fighting Spain since 1802, they aided the Americans in defeating the Spaniards. They thought that if the battle in Manila is won, they will get their Philippine independence with the help of the Americans. But the battle in Manila, with the defeat of the Spaniards, ended with the Treaty of Paris in June 1898. In June 1898, the Philippines was awarded to the Americans with a payment of $20 million for ceding the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Marianas Islands, including Cuba. But Cuba had a $400,000 loan from Spain, and the Americans did not want to assume that loan. So the Americans agreed to return Cuba to the Cubans so that they will be the one to pay the $400,000 loan to Spain. Now the Philippines was claimed by the Americans under the policy of then President McKinley. President McKinley's policy was called the Destiny of Nations, and it was his desire to colonize the Philippines, who were at that time considered savages that needs to be civilized. So they wanted to claim only Luzon, where most of the Americans were settled, and gave the rest of the Philippines back to Spain. But later, upon advice of the advisors here in the Philippines, President McKinley decided that the whole archipelago should be under American rule because it might create trouble in the future if part of the Philippines would be claimed by the Spaniards, and that especially Mindanao, where most of the Muslims were still fighting and were not subjugated by Spain, neither the Americans. This expected trouble from Mindanao. So McKinley advised the commission that worked in Paris with the Spanish commission, that they will claim the whole Philippines upon payment of $20 million. So the Filipinos were disappointed. They felt betrayed by the American people who started to rule over the Philippines. Aguinaldo declared war against the Americans in 1899. Before that, after winning in the fight with Spain, the Filipinos already controlled most of Luzon, some of the Visayas, and part of the Mindanao. And the main leader of the Filipino revolutionists called the Katipuneros were led by General Aguinaldo. And General Aguinaldo declared Philippine independence on June 12 of that year. And so they started fighting the Americans, and there were battles all over the Philippines fighting the Americans. But they were outnumbered and outgunned because the Americans had better arms and more ammunition, while the Filipinos were fighting only with small rifles, bolos, and spears. So all told, the Filipinos were subjugated by the Americans. But the Americans promised that the Filipinos will be given independence. And they promised that in 1935, the Philippines was given some self-rule. And the Commonwealth of the Philippines was established in 1935 with Aguinaldo running for president and Manuel Quezon for president. Aguinaldo was defeated, so Manuel Quezon became the first president of the Commonwealth of the Philippines. But then, after President Quezon became president of the Philippines, Commonwealth of the Philippines, the Second World War was declared. And so in between 1945, 1935, 1937, and then 1941, the Americans fought the Japanese in the Philippines in 1941, and the Philippines was under Japanese rule for a few years. When the Americans liberated the Philippines in 1945, they were promised independence by 1946. And so in 1946, Philippine independence was declared on July 4, 1946, similar to the Independence Day of the USA. The Filipinos ruled the Philippines from 1946 up to the present. All right, the Philippines inherited, however, from the Americans more than the Spaniards. For example, the Philippines inherited as American legacy education. The educational system of the Philippines after that was patterned after the United States. And then we also inherited the political system. That's why we have similar government structure, 3 branches. And we also inherited religious American religion, the evangelical Christians. So our legacy from the Americans were educational, political, and religious. And with that, many Filipinos were Americanized. I think my time is off, although I have a few things here to discuss, but I think we can continue this during the question and answer period. Okay, I rest my case, and you may hold your pace.
Thanks, Professor. Our next speaker is Dante Reyes. Dante?
Hi. Thank you, Jeremy, for having me here at the 360 North. And greet everybody, good evening. In Tagalog, it's magandang gabi sa inyong lahat. My topic here is something about my personal experiences here in the U.S. But prior to that, let me give you some brief history of where I came from. Came from the Philippines. I was a Filipino then. And then during the years of my life, I need to support the family. I married, got 2 kids, daughters actually. And I have to work and give them good economics in life. So I worked as various jobs, started with becoming a professor in one of the universities in the Philippines, the Polytechnic University. I taught accounting. And prior to that, I became a certified public accountant in the Philippines way back maybe 1976. And then the money was not enough. So I went to the Middle East to pursue some greener pastures for the family, support them, and also to get some more good fortunes in life. And I was there for 6 years. And prior to that, there was a sponsorship by my wife's parents to come here to the U.S. And it took about 12 years for us to wait. And so that it was approved in 1995. And then in 1996, we moved to the United States. And this is my first place here in the United States, was the Juneau, Alaska. And when the plane touched down the airport here in Juneau, I really fell in love with the place. It's something like you have all the needs that you can get from a small city. You have the sea resources, like you can fish, you can go to the forest, you can go enjoy the environmental. If you are fond of walking or go to the wilderness or something like that. And also you can travel if you want to, but travel is very limited, so only by sea and by air. But nevertheless, we fell in love, and that was in my mid-40s already. So it was sort of late here for me and my family to start in Juneau. Middle age at the time, but we have a saying that life begins at 40. So here I am, up to this date. And then my 2 daughters were still in high school, and my eldest already graduated in the Philippines in high school. My younger daughter graduated in Juneau Douglas High School here. And then still wanting to serve the United States, they became servicemen in our armed forces. And until now, they started working as servicemen or women in the armed forces in 2000, and until now they are still in that area. And today I'll be honored to speak to you that I am enjoying my life here. Almost 19 years in Juneau, Alaska, and I don't have any plan of moving into other states or in the down south. But once in a while, we visit the Philippines and visit our relatives and friends and parents. And once in a while, we go to maybe down south or Anchorage to enjoy some shopping and so on. Now, aside from this personal things about myself, I'd like also to give you some brief history of the Filipinos here in Alaska. I have some slides for the presentation, but I can do that later. I'd like to I mentioned to you some of the facts, the very basic part of the Filipinos here in Alaska. The first Filipino in Alaska was first officially booked or documented by a certain Captain Unambuno. And they came through the Nuestra Señora de Buena Esperanza, which left the Philippines on July 12, 1587, and reached the Morro Bay in California, somewhere in the middle of California, on October 18, 1587. So those were the first Filipino documentation of their presence here in the United States. Now later on, as life has been very formidable for some of the Filipinos, so it's not really formidable, but they have to sacrifice and work in some areas, not the management type level, but the lower part of their career has been with canning or mining or some other low-paying jobs in the United States. And some of them has some opportunity to work for greener pastures, so some of them, or most of them, worked in Alaska as Alaskeros. And the Alaskeros are the migrant seasonal workers in the United States. So they came to Alaska to work in the canneries or in mining during the summertime, and then in the winter time, they go out again to their original places and work somewhere else. Aside from this, I'd like to mention also about my affiliation with the association here in Juneau, Alaska, and this is the Filipino Community Inc. When we arrived here in the Filipino Community Inc., that was the time when almost the centennial celebration of the Philippine independence was being conducted, and there was a big event here in Juneau, Alaska, which was being sponsored by the Filipino Community Inc. of Juneau. And there was a big celebration during the time, Centennial Hall, dances, folkloric, to commemorate the independence of the Philippines from the, that was in 1998. So it's 100 years celebration at the time. Now before that, this time I'm going to give you a history, a small short history of the Filipino Community Inc. The Filipino Community Inc. is the oldest organized Filipino organization in the state of Alaska. The organization was incorporated in 1956, so that we had our 50th golden anniversary in 2006. There were, before that, during the time, there were several hundreds members, like 750 members. And at present time, we have about 300 members. And with the integration of racial marriages, families were enriched with significant lineages, ancestral lines, as well as cultural diversification. But we want to preserve the heritage, culture, and tradition of the Filipinos. And so some of our programs in the Filipino communities would be to educate our youth to come back to their roots and maybe go back to the tradition, the history, and the culture that the parents has experienced. Now I got some slides here to show you some of the activities in the Filipino communities, and I'd like to present that to you. The Filipino Community Inc. is at the very historic site in Juneau, Alaska, downtown Juneau. Its address is 251 South Franklin Street, Juneau, Alaska. We have a website, and that is philcomalaska.org. Philippines actually is a group of several islands. Three biggest islands are the Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, and these islands consist of almost 7,500 islands. That is our building, which is very historical and maintained properly by the group of members of the Filipino Community Inc. We have our motto that was generated by our forefathers who formed the organization way back in 1929 and 1956 to foster better and harmonious relationship, understanding, and brotherhood among ourselves and with other ethnic groups, and to keep alive our Filipino heritage, culture, customs, and traditions. And these are some of the names, the last names of the people that we owe the Filipino Community Inc. or indebted to this group of people. So these are the pioneers, actually, of the Filipino Community Inc. And in 2002, we got this Manila Square, which is symbolic of our national hero, which we have the bust of our national hero, Dr. Rizal. It's situated in front of the library. And then these are the past presidents who served the Filipino Community Inc. since 1956. And of course, as mentioned earlier, these are the census in 2000, wherein Filipinos in Alaska numbered about 12,000 persons or Filipinos. In 2010, there was another census. I think that was the latest one, and the Filipinos numbered almost double. No, not double, about increased by 50%. So, and about 27,000 or 28,000. The population of Filipinos in Juneau is about 3,000 in 2010. This is our logo when we had that 1929 seal. These are some of the pictures here are some of our outreach program. We participated in some fundraising and participate in the cultural show, international show with the First Lady of Alaska. Partnership with FCI and Alaska Native Sisterhood for their fundraising. And of course, we always participate in the July 4th, and we were noted for the beautiful floats that were vying the streets on July 4th. And this is our national, maybe national dance, and everybody's enjoying to participate at tinikling. And it's easy in the picture to dance, or it's easy to watch that, but when you are in that situation where you are actually dancing, it's very difficult. So, and this is our biggest fundraising in 2013, where the Philippines was hit by a very powerful typhoon, Haiyan, and this fundraising was all over Juneau, and participated in by the different folks in the Juneau community, and it was a very successful, and we sent the funds to the Philippines to help the victims of the typhoon. So I think time is not enough for me to speak, but if you have any questions, we'll be staying here a little bit and answer your questions. Thank you.
That was Dante Reyes. Thanks. Our final speaker is Raffy Castanos. He'll speak about some recent and ongoing Filipino issues he's involved in. Raffy Castanos.
Thanks, Jeremy, for describing me as an activist. But anyway, for the information of the audience, before I came here in America, I was one of the leaders that led in the revolt to topple down President Marcos in 1986. We were demonstrating there in EDSA. And most of the people that I'm associated with, one of which is my classmate, who is the Vice President of the Philippines now, Jojo Binay, and some of those illustrious participants in that revolution, namely Gringo Hunasan and all those guys, they know me. And when we elected the first female president, Corazon Aquino, the vice president at the time was Salvador Laurel. He took me in to work with him. And although I told him that I could not stay long because I have a pending visa to come over here in America. My purpose in coming over here is there is a big disparity between what you are reading and what you are seeing. So I want to find out myself what made America click. And now I know the answer already. So on my when I came over here in America, since I was quite sensitive about what's happening around my surrounding, I have to study carefully the political structure of America and compare it with the Philippines, because if I have to embark on certain projects that will benefit both countries, I have to establish certain connection between our local politicians here in the congressional delegation. Now, we are celebrating this time the entire month of October as Filipino-American Heritage Month. Now, that thing came about. Prior to that, there were Filipinos in California who started with the U.S. Congress about declaring October as Filipino-American History Month, which was quite successful. And the U.S. Congress approved in the form of a resolution. Now, there was a catch to it when I happened to get hold of the actual resolution obtained from the U.S. Congress, that it became incumbent on Filipinos scattered here in America, which is numbering about 4 million, to approach their respective legislature and obtain a similar resolution before they observe that month. Now, from the time that I was working on this state resolution here in Alaska, that was way back in 2009, there were only 5 states who were able to obtain the respective resolution from the respective state. So here in Juneau, we were able to obtain a state resolution number 14 in 2009 with the assistance of our Juneau delegation, which composed of Beth Cartula, Cathy Munoz, and Senator Egan, and we were successful. That's why we are celebrating this month now. Now, apart from that, because I'm very fond of reading things that's happening in the Philippines as well as here in America, I alerted our president at that time, Jeannie Strickler, that it would be beneficial if we could apply the Filipino community for the ABS-CBN award. ABS-CBN is the largest television network in the Philippines, and they were on the lookout for somebody here in America who is quite strong in community service. And we were surprised that when we filed that application, all of a sudden we got a notice that ABS-CBN is sending a private investigator to confirm what we have been accomplishing for many, many years. And then 2 days later, we were alerted that we won the award for community service. This is the first Filipino community in Alaska that won that prestigious award. Now, apart from that, I drew also the attention of Jeannie Strickler that there is, that was 2 years ago, that we were celebrating again this Filipino-American History Month, and the Los Angeles Filipino city employees were looking for an award, community service award, for any outstanding Filipino community in America that is worthy of that community award. And what is very funny in that award is we were only given 36 hours notice. So if we missed it, then we missed the whole thing. So we have to hurry up and complete the paper, and quite surprisingly, in the next 24 hours, we just got a notice that we won that award, the first time that it offered. So we have to send Ginny Del Rosario, who is in the audience, to pick up that award. It never happened. I never realized that Filipinos they came over here in America since about 400 years ago, which is even ahead of the Mayflower Compact, you know, that in Massachusetts. Now, sometime in 2002, I lobbied the legislature to create an Office of Citizenship Assistance. The reason of which is when I came over here, Filipinos here in Juneau were complaining that they don't have any immigration office here in Juneau. And it's quite expensive. The nearest one is in Ketchikan and in Anchorage. Now, just try to imagine a situation. Here is a Filipino who is working with McDonald's. How much are they being paid? $7 or $8 an hour. It will cost them, it's quite expensive to go to Ketchikan or Anchorage. And you are not even sure that if you go there, your problem can be solved. That's the risk that you have to take besides staying in a hotel. But, you know, convincing the legislature of the need for the creation of this office, you got to explain to them why it's needed. And fortunately, they listened. And 2003, it was the first bill worked out by Filipinos, signed into law by Governor Frank Markowski. He was a senator at the time. Now, what's interesting in this particular project that I was embarking is when my daughter was called upon by the U.S. Embassy, of which her papers to immigrate has already been processed, they discovered that I was an American citizen. Now, remember, if you filed an application as an immigrant, you are given by the immigration a priority date. Then you have to wait for that priority date to be called upon. So when my daughter was called upon, the U.S. Embassy in Manila discovered I'm already a U.S. citizen. That being the case, I belong to another category, and I have to wait for another 2 years. So I complained and talked to Senator Frank Markowski at that time. I told the senator at the time, that's quite unfair. I'm being penalized for something. They should be happy that I'm already a U.S. citizen. That will expedite things. So I think they sat down together with the entire Alaskan delegation, with the immigration, to come up with a scheme on how to do it. And out of that, there was an amendment to the immigration law known as the Child Status Protection Act. And that act itself stipulates that if you are faced with a situation like myself, of which my daughter was already being interviewed as by an immigrant, whichever is the first, the priority date that's current should prevail, but I have to write a letter to the U.S. Attorney General's office. That at that time, what was current was if I petition my child as an immigrant and he is being single, that will prevail rather than an American citizen, because it will take me another 2 years. So it was quite funny when finally my daughter was called upon by the U.S. Embassy. Those clerks there in the U.S. Embassy said, no, we cannot process your papers because your father is an American citizen and his category, the category was changed. You have to wait for another 2 years, so stop. So I have to burn the hotline and call up the congressional delegation. And then all of a sudden, the Consul General of the U.S. Embassy in Manila said and instructed all those clerks, you don't know anything, you better process the papers. And they were surprised because the papers of my daughter was that thick. There was a red ribbon, that means to say top priority. And then now everybody is benefiting from the Child Status Protection Act. And the details, I don't have the copy now, but it's that at least those are some of the things, because if I did not complain, nothing will happen with it. Because we came over here in America, I'm a professional immigrant. I was not petitioned by anybody or, came over here because of as a political refugee or what. I'm a professional under the third preference. In other words, I possess certain skill many years ago that's in severe shortage by the U.S. government. I have to be certified by the U.S. Department of Labor that skill of mine is needed here in America, and I can proceed with the immigration. Now, I initiated also the recognition. This is what you call legislative citation for 12 Filipino who were recognized because of their achievement. 10 of that is from Juneau, 2 are from Anchorage. One example of that is the first Filipino ship captain of the Alaska Marine Highway. We have 3 nurses in that group. And then out of that group also, 2 Filipina were also adopted by the Tlingit Haida tribe. That never happened, first time. And then I initiated also the first seafood festival in Manila, 2014. That never happened because the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute they inform us that the Philippines they don't have any plans having a seafood festival in Manila. So we have to coordinate with the Office of the Governor and find support from him. What the governor at that time, Parnell, did was to instruct the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute to hurry up and come up with the feasibility studies to justify the holding of the first seafood festival in Manila, which actually was accomplished. Because for the first time, a sitting governor never attended a meeting of the Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute, but Governor Parnell did it for us to make sure that we have a seafood festival, which was widely accepted in the Philippines. And Alaska, during the typhoon, which is similar to your typhoon here, we donate that worst typhoon that visited the Philippines. Alaska, for the first time, donated 133,000 pounds of pink salmon. 2 Hercules 130 was sent over there. And then we were initiated the first successful trade mission in Aklan, which is headed by our representative. And finally, we were able to work it out for to be given a meritorious service award for our present honorary consul. I think that will be all because we might lack the time. Sorry.
That was Raffy Castanos. Thanks, Raffy. We've got a few minutes left for questions from the Format 360 audience. Here in the studio, if you have questions for our guests, please queue up at the microphone. And I might ask the first question. Loy Maturan, you're in the process of self-publishing a book. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I have the book here. But this is still being corrected. I found that there are some errors, and so I told them to stop printing. And I will send a copy of this after the correction. This is about our kidnapping. We were kidnapped by Muslim rebels for ransom. They asked 1 million pesos, which was about $25,000 at that time. We were not able to, we were released after more than 1 week, but we did not pay the ransom money. Upon arrangement of some of my Muslim friends in the Rotary Club, I was then president of the Rotary Club in Marawi City, and most of my members were Muslims, and they arranged for our release, together with some Christian leaders and government leaders and education leaders, because I was then president of the college in Dansalan. So this is the book about our experience when we were kidnapped, and how we prayed hard, and how people prayed for us. And I believe that Providence helped us in being released earlier. Prior to my service as president in that college was an American president. He was kidnapped for 21 days. And the board of trustees of the school hired a Filipino, thinking that a Filipino will not be kidnapped by Muslims, but they did kidnap me. So this book is about that kidnapping.
Sounds like an interesting story. It looks like we've got a question at the microphone.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you very much to the panel of speakers, Raffy Castanos, Dante Reyes, and Loy Maturan. My name is Jenny Del Rosario, and I'm very fortunate to be part of the Filipino community here in Alaska. In fact, I'm also grateful to KRNN for giving the Filipino community our own radio program to showcase our culture and tradition here in Juneau and being heard in Southeast Alaska. Thank you very much. And my question is all for Kuya Raffy Castanos or Dante or anybody, that being active in the community, basically culturally and traditionally, we are very visible. And also, we also are very active in lobbying with our political representatives about our what we need for our community. But how come at this point of time, having backtracking many years, 100 years, that we would like to have visibility in the political arena of being part of the commission, and also having a representative in the city and in the state? Why do you think at this point of time, to the speakers who are knowledgeable and respectable community leaders, why do you think that we don't have at this point of time anybody getting into politically to be able to be part of the lawmaking body of our state, of our city? I gear this question to Mr. Raffy Castanos, politically correct every time we have needs for
I
it.
think the problem that we are faced with here, if you are quite observant, there are a lot of immigrants coming from the Philippines, but Alaska is not their cup of tea. I noticed that majority of Filipinos wanting to stay here in Alaska, it's because they want to work with the cannery. The ordinary people coming from the hinterlands, the barrios, and so on. Many of the professionals, you can find them all in the lower 48. I'm speaking of California, Florida, Texas, New York. These are the kind of... So it's next to impossible. That's why I'm doing it by myself. I'm just showing them how to do it. But to transfer that kind of connection, it's next to impossible. We just have to orient our young people to tell them, we are not here to stay for long. You either help us, and get educated. Because even if you talk to their parents, where in the world can you find, Your parents telling you, you guys, you better participate. You get to know your mayor, your member of the assembly or the congressional delegation. I'm a little bit disappointed because, you know, if you ask them, one of the questions for naturalization is, who is your governor? Who is your senator? They are at a loss to answer unless you tell them. That's why, look at the voters' turnout here. In Alaska, in general, it's very, very poor because there's a lack of civic-mindedness. They have not been oriented. That if you want to get, you know, you want to change something, you got to be involved. You got to know your representative. You got to tell them that this is the needs of the community and this is how you can involve. Otherwise, I'm trying to erase that misconception that when you introduce to me a Filipino, well, you know, I like your adobo, pancit, or any of the other food. Is that all that we can do? We have to show to them that, you know, what the whites are doing or other races here, we can do it also. Right. But we have to speak. Okay. You have to speak up.
We've just about run out of time here, so we've got to wrap it up. I'd just like to point out that this was a cover story actually recently in the Alaska Economic Trends issue in March. Got a few copies of that running around. That's all the time we have. We've been speaking about Filipinos in Alaska with Loy Maturan, Dante Reyes, and Raffy Castanos. I'm Jeremy Hsieh. Thanks for joining us on Forum at 360.